walk into this room at your own risk, because it leads to the future. Not a future that will be, but one that might be. This is not a new world. It is simply an extension of what began in the old one. It has patterned itself after every dictator who has ever planted the ripping imprint of a boot on the pages of history since the beginning of time. It has refinements, technological advances, and a more sophisticated approach to the destruction of human freedom. But like every one of the super-states that preceded it, it has one iron rule. Logic is an enemy and truth is a menace. This is Mr. Romney Wordsworth in his last 48 hours on Earth. He's a citizen of the state, but will soon have to be eliminated. Because he is built out of flesh, and because he has a mind.
You've been under investigation, Mr. Wordsworth, for the mandatory period of 1 year and 11 months. You're found to be obsolete. The purpose of this hearing is to make a finding in the matter and make a sentence accordingly. Do you understand that, Mr. Wordsworth? Your occupation, Mr. Wordsworth?
A librarian, sir.
A librarian. Having to do with books.
Yes, sir. Books.
Since there are no more books, Mr. Wordsworth, there are no more libraries. The field investigators in your sector have classified you as obsolete. Your rights are as follows, Mr. Wordsworth. You are to be liquidated within a period of 48 hours. You are obsolete, Mr. Wordsworth.
A lie. No man is obsolete.
You have no function, Mr. Wordsworth. You're an anachronism, like a ghost from another time.
I am nothing more than a reminder to you that you cannot destroy truth by burning pages.
You're a bug, Mr. Wordsworth, a crawling insect, an ugly, misformed little creature who has no purpose here, no meaning.
I am a human being.
Delusions, Mr. Wordsworth. Delusions that you inject into your veins with printer's ink. The narcotics that you call literature, poetry, essays of all kind, all of it an opiate. You have nothing but spindly limbs and a dream, and the state has no use for your kind.
I don't care. I tell you, I don't care. I'm a human being. I exist. And if I speak one thought aloud, that thought lives, even after I'm shoveled into my grave.
The Chancellor, the late Chancellor, was only partly correct. He was obsolete. But so is the state, the entity he worshipped. Any state, any entity, any ideology that fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete.
There, now we have sound, right? So, as I was telling, this is very concerning, right? This is gravitas weon, and this is very concerning because it's 107 countries that are in economic crisis, right? 107 countries. Can you imagine that? Now, they're talking about Sri Lanka, which is near India. There you go. There you have Sri Lanka, and yeah, it's a country that's in economic crisis. The cabinet fell, and now there's a new cabinet installed, and they say it's going to get worse before it gets better. So that's one of the 107 countries that are in economic crisis. And you also have Lebanon, right? We've been watching that ever since the explosion in Beirut. And over there, there's a very big economic crisis too. Egypt is also one of the countries in economic crisis. Ethiopia and Somalia, they're also in economic crisis. So it's amazing. We're going to take a look at this here. Gravitas.
Do you remember the 80s? Glorious times, the age of extreme fashion, heavy metal, break dancing and mixtape. A strange and magical era which is still widely celebrated, but not in Latin America. They consider the 80s the lost decade. Why? Because they faced financial turmoil in the 80s, a debt typhoon which eroded their economies. What was the trigger? 2 large oil price shocks. Skyrocketing oil prices disrupted their finances, created big deficits and surpluses, took their foreign debt to unprecedented highs and pushed their economies to the point of collapse.
Wait a minute, I got it. Here's the settings here. You see the quality is too high. So we're going to lower the quality so it loads somewhat better. So here we go.
Mexico was the first country to fall. In 1982, it declared that it will not be able to pay its debt. What followed was a series of sovereign defaults in Latin America. One country after another was engulfed in the debt crisis. Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, Ecuador, all of them fell like dominoes. They faced deep recession, high inflation, mounting debt, unemployment, and slow economic growth. 3 decades on, is history about to repeat itself? Look around you. Developing countries the world over are struggling with a sovereign debt crisis. One of them has already succumbed. Sri Lanka. Its economy has collapsed, ballooning debt and shrinking foreign reserves.
Look what's happening over there at Sri Lanka, right? Now, as I've said before, it's right over here near India. There you go. And we're going to take a look at this here. New Sri Lankan Prime Minister says crisis to worsen before improving. As I've said before, right, they have a new cabinet, and yeah, the new Prime Minister says it's going to get worse before it gets better. The darkness come before the dawn, right? So.
What is unfolding in Sri Lanka, where even after the appointment of a new Prime Minister in Sri Lanka, the island nation's woes continue unabated. The newly appointed Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe faces an uphill task of saving the island nation from financial collapse. To pull Sri Lanka out of the crisis, Wickremesinghe has appealed to the world for more financial help. In his first interview since taking office for his 6th stint as the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister described the Sri Lankan economy as broken, while also stressing that the economic crisis is set to worsen before it gets better. Now, with a promise to bring stability back to the island nation, Wickremesinghe has called on the Sri Lankan people to be patient. He has said that there won't be a hunger crisis and that he will ensure that the families in the country get at least 3 meals in a day.
good opportunity to bring the system change that people ask.
Meanwhile, anger over Gotabaya Rajapaksa's government's handling of the crisis has led to the violent protests across Sri Lanka. The 73-year-old United National Party leader was appointed in an attempt to try and defuse the protests. The ambassadors of Japan, the United States, China and the Indian High Commissioner to Sri Lanka met with Ranil Wickremesinghe. The discussion, of course, focused on forming an international forum for financial assistance for the people of Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, India's export financing institution Exim Bank is looking at restructuring its $1.3 billion exposure to crisis-ridden Sri Lanka. The country is facing its worst ever foreign crisis, and Exim...
So India is making money, right, to lend out to Sri Lanka, you know, to help their economy. Well, that's also a very big chunk out of India's GDP, you know, gross domestic product. You know, so it's a very odd situation there. But we're going to take a look at this here. Shrinking foreign reserves. I've also said about Egypt, right? And she's going to touch on that too. So we're going to take a look at this here.
There isn't enough money to pay for basic necessities. Of course, this crisis is of Sri Lanka's own making. The Rajapaksas mismanaged the finances. They spent more than the national income. They allowed deep tax cuts and destroyed the economy. But the world did not help. Look at the global factors at play. The pandemic-induced slowdown, the growing cost of borrowing, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has increased food and fuel prices. These factors compounded the Lankan crisis. And they still persist. The fear is that the Lankan crisis could mutate. Experts say Colombo is just the canary in the coal mine. More countries are set to fall. The entire developing world is at risk. Hello and welcome to Gravitas Plus. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. On the 15th of February, exactly 9 days before Russia invaded Ukraine, the World Bank issued a warning. Developing nations face a looming debt crisis. The World Bank named 70 countries, 70 low and middle income countries facing debt repayments worth $11 billion. The report said this burden could crush their economies in 2022. 9 days later, Russia invaded Ukraine. The invasion disrupted supply chains, it threw financial markets into disarray, and triggered a global oil crisis. The economic forecasts became darker and starker. In March, the United Nations released this report. It said there were 107 economies that face at least one of the three risks. Number one, rising food prices. Number two, rising energy prices. And three, tougher financial conditions. 107 countries face these risks. Together, they represent 1.7 billion people. That's more than 1/5 of humanity. Did
you hear that? 1/5 of humanity. So that's a lot of people. You know, that is a lot of people. It's like millions and millions of people. Now, I've said this in another live during the Dutch sessions, put it that way. I said there's a big economic crisis coming our way, you know, and we're supposed to be prepared for this. But of course we're not, because nothing's going to happen in the Netherlands, right?
There are 69 countries that face all the three risks: food, energy, finance, all three. 69 countries could go the Sri Lanka way. 25 in Africa, 25 in the Asia Pacific, and 19 in Latin America. Which countries are these? We'll start with Egypt, the land of pharaohs. It is in the throes of a financial crisis. Egypt is the world's largest importer of wheat. Russia and Ukraine were its top suppliers. As they fight now, the supplies are running out. Last month, Egypt said that its wheat reserves will not last more than 3 months. Next, we have Tunisia, the birthplace of the Arab Spring. Its economy is overheating. Foreign debt accounts for 100% of its GDP. The trade deficit has widened to $800 million. Inflation stands at 7%. Fuel prices at record highs.
So I said Egypt, right? And she showed Egypt. Now here's Egypt. And over here we have Tunisia, right? So for a tourist, it looks beautiful and stuff like that. But outside of that bubble, it's a hellhole, man. You know, it's a real hellhole. So that's what's happening in Tunisia, right? So you do the math, you know, you do the math.
Experts say Tunisia could soon face civil unrest. The same warning has been issued for Lebanon. The Switzerland.
As I've said before, Lebanon, you know, that's also on our radar. Lebanon, it's a failed state basically, and they're going to have new elections in, I believe it's August somewhere, and they already had elections, but you know, the cabinet couldn't form, so they have an interim cabinet, and now they're going to get new elections, and the key players are Hezbollah, which is supported by Iran, basically, and that's one of the key players. And there's also another Islamic faction and other small factions, you know, so it's very hard to make a coalition in Lebanon. So that's what's happening there.
Switzerland of West Asia, well, not anymore. In 2020, the Beirut blasts destroyed Lebanon's largest grain stores. Food prices went up by 11 times. The Lebanese pound lost 90% of its value. Public debt grew to 360% of the GDP. The war in Ukraine complicated things further. Lebanon imported 80% of its wheat from...
Did you see that? 90% of its value. It's like, what? It's like toilet paper, man, you know?
Tunisia could soon face civil unrest. The same warning has been issued for Lebanon. The Switzerland of West Asia, well, not anymore. In 2020, the Beirut blasts destroyed Lebanon's largest grain stores. Food prices went up by 11 times.
11 times. Now, say you buy a can of soda for like $1, right? That means that that same can of soda that was $1 is $11, you know, the next day. It's like, what? Try to pay that with a salary where you earn like maybe, you know, $10 a day or something. I don't know. These people are mostly unemployed. There is no work.
The Lebanese pound lost 90% of its value.
90% of its value. You know, even toilet paper has more value than the Lebanese pound. With toilet paper, you could wipe your behind. So
Public debt grew to 360% of the GDP. The war in Ukraine complicated things further. Lebanon imported 80% of its wheat from Ukraine. Those supplies have fallen. There's a bread shortage, a scarcity of sunflower oil. Lebanon has been forced to take a $150 million loan from the World Bank to ensure food security.
you see, that's where things go wrong. Argentina is also one of the people that lends from the IMF, International Monetary Fund. That's where things go wrong. You see, money is made out of nothing. And when you put even more money in the money supply, it's worth less, you know. And if you lend that money and invest it in companies and stuff like that, then you have to pay back the money that you lent with interest, you know, and try to pay that back when it's like $1 trillion dollars or whatever. You know, when it's that big of amount, it's very hard to pay back. Very hard to pay back. That's why Argentina is struggling. You know, if you look at this here, 3 months ago there was a very big protest in Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. And let's take a look at this here.
They came to express their anger about the negotiations between Argentina and the International Monetary Fund. Thousands of people in front of the presidential palace demanded the government to prioritize the people instead of the IMF. Jorge Altamira has been a lawmaker for years.
The government is renegotiating the agreement and they know they won't be able to pay it. And in 2 years we will have the same problem. We cannot pay back that amount of money without strangling the poorest.
In 2018, the IMF granted the government of Mauricio Macri the biggest loan in its history, over $50 billion.
You see, $50 billion. Now, you're loaning that from a bank, right? You have to pay it back with interest. Now, you can't pay it back in one time. You need term limits for that. You know, so you're stuck with the bank that lent you money. You see, that's the whole problem. You cannot get out of it. Now, my solution would be dissolve the World Bank. You know, let these countries have their own currency and dissolve the World Bank. You see, if you have your own currency, then you can, you know, build a stable economy, right? So that's what's, in my opinion, that's what needs to happen. So that's Argentina for you. Let's take a look at other countries.
Then we have Argentina, the land of tango, also caught on the wrong foot now. Inflation is paralyzing its economy. External debt is mounting. Argentina has defaulted on debt repayments 9 times. To avoid a 10th default, it has gone to the IMF. It wants to refinance a $45 billion loan. It may give Argentina a brief reprieve, but it will not quell the civil unrest. Analysts say Argentina is staring at a long and cold winter this year. Some other Latin American countries are also at risk, like El Salvador and Peru. They face hyper...
The last thing I saw from El Salvador was that they were putting their finances in cryptocurrency, right? That was El Salvador. Let's see, El Salvador. I'm in the neighborhood. El Salvador. There we go. There you have El Salvador, right? And the last thing I saw that they were in cryptocurrency, El Salvador, Bitcoin, there you go. You see, they're in a cryptocurrency, and that's also not doing well, because you have to invest in a cryptocurrency to let the cryptocurrency flow. You see, and if there's no investment, then the cryptocurrency will drop. It will fall. And that's why El Salvador is in an economic crisis. They basically jumped the ship too far, you know. They wanted to be on first place technology wise and stuff like that, you know. So they basically wanted to follow China with their social credit system, and El Salvador yeah, it's failing basically. So El Salvador's president went all in on Bitcoin, then it tanked. You see, that's because you have no investors. Yeah, that's the whole problem of Bitcoin. You need investors to let the currency grow, you know. So that's El Salvador, and what else? Peru, right? Yeah, Peru is also in very declining economic crisis, basically.
Not quell the civil unrest. Analysts say Argentina is staring at a long and cold winter this year. Some other Latin American countries are also at risk, like El Salvador and Peru.
There, you see, Peru. Now, Peru is, let's enlarge the map here. It's also here somewhere. Peru. There you go. There, you see, there you have Peru. So that's also an economic crisis, right? You have a new president, a very young guy. Or was that Chile? I always confuse those countries, you know. But yeah, let's take a look at what she has to say about these countries.
They face hyperinflation in commodities, tumbling bonds, food shortages, detonating prices, and mass unemployment. Very much like Sri Lanka. Reports say both countries could soon face civil unrest. In sub-Saharan Africa, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, Ethiopia could be the worst.
Ghana, Ethiopia, Kenya, and South Africa. I also said Somalia, right? Yeah, but I was confused with the new president. We'll get on to that. Let's see, Ghana. It's over here. There you go. There you have Ghana, right? And South Africa and Ethiopia and what else? Kenya. So that's also going on, you know. Here you have Kenya. So 107 countries that are in a deep economic crisis, and it's getting from bad to worse. And I basically already said this, you know, in Dutch. I warned people about this, about the deep economic crisis. Now, we're not even going to talk about Ukraine because that's the fog of war. You know, we're not choosing sides here. We just want the war to end, basically. But what Sweden has been doing, and also trying to provoke Finland in doing what Russia does not want, which is join NATO. Yeah. So Sweden used to be a neutral country, and now they signed up for NATO. And NATO said, "Yay!" So that's also happening, you know. And I believe she also says Turkey, you know. So we're going to look.
Hit. In Ghana, debt levels are soaring. Interest payments are choking the economy. A debt crisis looks imminent. In Kenya, the debt has climbed to $70 billion. That's 70% of its GDP. Last week, They got a $244 million loan from the IMF to weather this economic.
Now, when you're in an economic crisis, right? Say you live on the streets. You have no home, you live on the streets, right? And someone comes towards you and they say, we got $244 million that we can lend you. Now, how long would that take to pay back when you basically have nothing? You know? And you have to pay that back in interest, right?
Storm. In South Africa, the debt has reached 80% of its GDP. There's a looming threat of state collapse, a rerun of the 2021 civil unrest.
Yep, there you go, Turkey. But the civil unrest, we also captured that on RHTVLive last year, and that was very, very bad. You know, very, very bad. We're going to take a look at the unrest in South Africa, if we can find it. South Africa unrest 2021. People have died on the streets, and people took up in arms, and it was the people against the people. And you have these gangs, you know, rivaling against each other and stuff. And there's a racial war going on. You know, the white Africans, put it that way. There were basically Dutch immigrants that went to Africa. The Boeren, they stayed there for generations and stuff like that. And you had an African president who said, kill the Boer. And he was all singing and joyful about it. Let's see if we can zoom out. Kill the Boer. There you go. So there you have him, Jacob Zuma. And he's basically killed the white, you know, Boers and take over their land, basically. And that's what's been happening during the South African unrest last year. So first we're going to take a look at this year. The South African president back then, I don't know if he's still in power. I think he stepped down, right? I believe there was a very big commission looking at corruption charges for Zuma, but we're going to take a look at this first.
Sondelani ninenwinileyo sizobadubula ngempampa bazobaleka du sizobadubula ngempampa bazobaleka du kulipul sizokushaya uzotutulwa ulikhulu sizokushaya uzobaleka sizobat.
These are all militians, right? That are going to take over the white man's farm, you know, and that's basically what they're singing. Kill the Boer.
jubula. Azobalega jubula. Sizoba jubula. Azobalega jubula. Ulipuno uzoshaya uzobalega jubula.
What does this guy think? That he's like the dictator of Turkmenistan? You know? Have you heard that? Have you heard that guy sing? You know? We'll get on to that. We're going to look at the South African unrest that took place last year.
Authorities in South Africa say that more than 70 people have been killed in some of the worst violence the country has seen in years. Stores and warehouses across the country have been looted, and more than 1,000 people have been arrested. The unrest erupted last week after former President Jacob Zuma began serving a prison sentence for contempt of court.
This warehouse in Durban was ransacked by hundreds of people. The shelves emptied, the goods carried out in bulk. It is only one of dozens of malls, supermarkets, and small shops that were targeted by looters. Like this party supplies shop in Soweto.
It's over. It's over. I've got overheads. I owe banks money. How am I going to pay this?
You see, she owes banks money. That is the major problem. You see, the banks, they control us. And it's supposed to be the other way around, right? We're the consumers. They need us, but we need them to buy shop, to buy supplies and whatever else. It's not fair. You see, the thing I believe in is monetary freedom. I believe that the banks should not make the money. I believe the power of making money should belong to the people, not the banks. You see, when you can make money out of nothing, like a bank does, basically, you can support yourself. You know, you don't need a monopoly capitalist system to thrive, basically. You know? So there you have it, the South African unrest. And there are major things going on. Now, we're going to go over to Turkey. And Turkey is also a very important country because, as you can see, it's Ukraine that's above Turkey. The Black Sea is the thing separating them. And it's very sad to see what's happening in Turkey. We're still dealing with Erdogan, which basically survived the coup in 2016. And ever since, he's been getting rid of the opposition. You know, he's basically a sultan, and he's fighting off the Kurds who want their own autonomous state within Turkey. You know, and Turkey says they're also in northern Iraq. So they're also stationing there, you know, making these bases in northern Iraq. Now, Iraq had said, we don't want any foreign intrusion. You know, we don't want Syrians on our land. We don't want Iranians on our land or other people. We want Iraqi people on our land, Iraqi army, you know. So they're basically finding out a route to be nationalistic in a global economy, you know, and yeah, it's they're struggling too, I guess. I guess that's also one of the 107 countries that's in a debt crisis.
Next comes Turkey. The currency is sliding, the debt is soaring, upwards of 54% of the GDP. Inflation has touched 70%. GDP forecast cut to 3.3%. There's a food shortage. Turkey is getting 50,000 tons of wheat from India. And these were just a few examples. The World Bank says that in the next 12 months, as many as a dozen developing economies may not be able to service their debt. This will be the largest debt crisis in a generation.
That's because the debt is too big. I gave an example, right? You have no income, you're on the streets, and then someone comes towards you. I got $100 million to lend to you, and you have to pay me that back with interest. Now, maybe you can earn that back if you're like Ronaldinho or something like that. So it's amazing, really is amazing, So we're still going to take a look at this.
What about India? It will feel the impact. A few state economies are already inching towards a debt crisis. In Punjab, West Bengal, Bihar and Andhra Pradesh, the debt to GDP ratio is identical to Sri Lanka's. On the 3rd of April, Indian bureaucrats expressed concern. They said populist measures in these states could ruin their economies and leave them broke like Sri Lanka. Now here's the thing, the entire world is in debt distress. National budgets are at breaking point. Some governments are being forced to cut spending. Others are borrowing more to stay afloat. What can we do to stop this? How can the world prevent a debt typhoon? We spoke to experts and we've compiled a roadmap. This is what they say needs to be done urgently and collectively. Number one, manage borrowing and lending better. Creditors should offer contingency plans.
That is the worst thing you can do. Don't restructure a bad thing, just replace it. Replace it with a new idea, We are the people. We have the power to make our own currency. We don't need a king or a bank or whatever else. This is making the countries broke, basically. And this is bad. This is bad. So restructuring loans and stuff like that, it's a bad idea, man.
Plans to borrowers, plans to pause repayments if the borrower faces financial difficulties. Number two, introduce better ways to manage shocks and crises. Low-income countries are always vulnerable to external crises. A high proportion of their debt is in foreign currency. This makes their economies vulnerable to external changes. We need to develop a mechanism which insulates them from such shocks, a mechanism to restructure unsustainable debts better. Solution number three, expand the common framework's eligibility criteria. What's that? It's a framework established by the G20. It's supposed to help poor countries restructure their debt. Well, so far this framework applies to only 73 of the poorest countries in the world.
73 of a list of 107 countries. We're talking about millions and millions of people. Don't they have, a reason to live, a stable life? Don't they want that? I think they would want that, But you have to save your own country. Fight for the country you live in or die in a country you don't know. It's as simple as that, We leave it to all these politicians and they keep on lending and spending and lending and spending, that doesn't go to the population. No, it goes to the banker friends and all those fat cats, that are earning a lot of cash on this, So it's amazing.
It should be expanded. It should cover other highly indebted countries, also vulnerable lower middle income countries. Solution number 4, promote alternatives to borrowing. Lower income countries face major public financing shortfalls, even for basic public needs like healthcare and education. Studies say if these countries improve tax collection, they can reduce the need for borrowing more.
Number 1, first you need to get rid of the IMF, right? Don't restructure it. Put in a new idea, like, making your own money. As banks do, why not the population, right? Number 2, be self-sufficient. Don't rely on government to help you out. Because, as I've said, they're lending and spending, they don't care about you. There are so many other stuff you can say, but it's very hard, very, very hard, because when you say it, it's like it comes out. Everything I say, it comes to fruition. It's like, oh my God, am I the only one seeing this? Everyone's basically focused on their own country, their own problems in their own country. But there are many, many other countries that are having a lot of issues, economically and socially, and basically society is falling apart wherever you look. Governments are more totalitarian, right? And I'm not a news broadcaster. I'm just some guy behind the laptop, searching for news, searching for what's happening around the world. And I'm trying to explain what's happening, basically. So, and Somalia, right? Somalia has a new president. Well, actually, it's an old president. Somalia president. There you go. Somalia re-elects former leader Hassan Sheikh Mohamud as president. So let's take a look at this. This is 10 seconds. That's too. We need more footage on this guy. So we're going to take a look at Al Jazeera, and many people in Somalia, in the Horn of Africa, are happy that their old president is back. Let's take a look at this here.
Hassan Sheikh Mohamud was president of Somalia once before. Now he's back in office again.
My country needs to work forward and not go backward, and it doesn't need violence and revenge. Whatever was done to people, we call for forgiveness.
This time, the gunfire on the streets of the capital Mogadishu is in celebration rather than armed conflict. People here are glad to have a change of leader. Hassan Sheikh defeated outgoing President Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, known as Farmajo, whose popularity has declined over his 5 years in office. His critics say he's made Somalia's conflicts and economy worse, and that he tried to stay in power by stalling the election.
Now, for the people who are wondering where Somalia is, as I said, the Horn of Africa, it's this here, here you have Somalia. The capital is Mogadishu, and I'm going to take a look at this. Now, people don't elect like we do, you know. You got like these tribe members, and they elect for the people. And they elect the president, basically. So we're going to take a look at this.
It was meant to happen more than a year ago. Somalis don't actually get to vote. MPs were chosen by officials and clan representatives. Then the MPs voted for presidential candidates in a series of 3 rounds.
It's an electoral system that was introduced after Somalia's central government collapsed in 1991. It's been much criticised. It was meant to be transitional so that Somalia could move to having elections with one person, one vote. That hasn't happened. But one thing that this system has always delivered is a change of a head of state.
Everyone familiar with the process says buying of votes and corruption are widespread, but loyalties aren't guaranteed. In the last round, it was the opposition uniting against outgoing President Farmajo that tipped the balance. But Hassan Sheikh inherits some major challenges. The armed group Al-Shabaab is stronger than it was when his first term ended 5 years ago. It controls swathes of the countryside. And Somalia has been suffering one of its worst droughts in decades. The UN has warned of a pending famine. More than 700,000 people have lost their farms and livestock and fled the countryside into camps. They urgently need help.
They urgently need help. Yet we look, you know, at sports and we follow the stars. You know, Johnny Depp, Amber Heard. Amber Heard did a big doogie on the bed of Johnny Depp, you know, and that's been like world news, and people are still, people are still shocked at what happened at the Oscars. You know, people are still talking about it, but people are not talking about Somalia or Peru or other countries we just shown.
In Mogadishu, it's a moment for optimism.
We celebrate the victory of President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. We want him to prioritize security and establish one person, one vote, and create jobs, especially.
People always need to follow a leader. Now, politics has been corrupt ever since the time of Caesar, you know. Oh, Brutus, you too? Yeah, Brutus stabbed him, basically. He was the first to stab him. And the Idols of March. So it's been corrupt ever since, you know. Governments have been overthrown and stuff like that. French Revolution, right? So people need to follow a leader somehow. People don't realize that you are the leader. You are the leader. This dude, whatever his name is, Muhammad, you know, he's just a guy, just like you and me, you know. But he follows politics and he jumps in the swamp, put it that way. And that's how he basically survives, you know. He's not doing it for the people. That's the image that he gives. You know, it's been that way with every president, basically. So,
Especially for the youth.
The extended election period has been tense and sometimes violent. Now it's over. People hope things will get better. Malcolm Webb.
Now, to give some background perspective, right, there are many groups fighting each other in Somalia during the late 80s, early 90s. And special rules and regulations have been put in place. As I've said before, you got these electoral people electing for you, and it's basically a big hellhole. So we have the old president acting as a new president in Somalia, that's also probably one of the 107 countries in the world that are dealing with an economic crisis, So be aware of what's coming. We're in a transitional period with a deepening economic crisis, and you'll see that many governments will go to a digital currency, right? And you'll see that a lot of governments are like, go to hell with your debt. We're going over to a digital currency. That's the way China is doing it, and many other countries will follow. That's my analysis, put it that way. So you may agree or disagree. Put down in the comments if you agree or disagree. And yeah, I believe that's enough for now. It's 4 a.m. over here, and I gave enough geopolitics. Now I hope that there are streamers in the US that have interest in doing some geopolitics, talking about Taiwan and Philippines and their election, stuff like that. It's very interesting to hear other perspectives. So maybe we'll open a bar and invite some people. Like Fake Mike Real News. I know you're watching, man. I know you're watching. So, people, thanks for watching. Thanks for sharing. And this has been RHTVLive, signing out.